What thought comes to mind immediately when I say deny yourself? Do you find yourself thinking negatively about all of the things you would be missing out on? Or do you come to the realization that denying yourself simply means to get out of the way of God's goodness in your life? This week on Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake, we'll learn that our earthly desires can be the biggest obstacle to experiencing all that God has in store for us. Drake Hunter is senior pastor at Elevating Life Church in Fort Morgan, Colorado, founder of the nonprofit 4Dimensional Living, as well as the author of 3 books, including his latest, Wonderfully Weird, and the soon-to-be-published 4th book, Wonderfully Weird Goodness. Now, this week's edition of Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake Hunter. Welcome back once again to Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake. I'm your host, John Waters. Pastor Drake here in studio with me. Good morning once again, sir.
Good morning. As always, John, it's good to be with you.
Always good to bring our minds together and see what kind of trouble we can get into.
Yes, and see who we can bring with us.
Exactly. Well, this week on Wonderfully Weird Living, the command is deny yourself. And as I said in the open for this program, sometimes we're our own worst enemy. We think that denying ourselves is something bad when actually it's very positive, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, that's right. This is an interesting command because even when you think about it, deny yourself in the nature of who we are in the fall as human beings doesn't make any sense whatsoever, especially in how we've been conditioned through, let's say, our teachings and our relationships and or, our past experiences. It just doesn't make sense in the sense of the human nature that we're so familiar with in the fall. And I've got to say that because we do have a divine nature, we have to understand this through. And of course, divine nature in the sense of the human being is always through Jesus Christ. And that's exactly who taught this command for good reason, so that then we can be not in the nature of man in the sense of that fall, but we're in the nurturing aspect of what that is through his teachings, so that we can truly know what it means to deny self, so we can be fulfilled and truly be effective in the faith, so that we can be in the presence of the Lord, so that we can truly live that life we are truly designed to live with God and others who decide to do the same.
Well, this wonderfully weird command, deny yourself, comes from Luke chapter 9. So as folks are turning there to Luke chapter 9, what is our question of the week?
Well, with this very radical command in our mind's eye, deny yourself, here's the question. Are you the center of your existence? Something to think about and really reflect on in the sense of our own reality. Because if we are, you should expect certain things to happen, and probably not good.
Right.
So we've got to really ask that question, assess it well, so that then we can resolve the issue, of course, always through Jesus and who we are in the sense of his disciples, so that then we can then experience that life. We ought to be living with Christ at the center of who we are, and also with others.
Well, as I mentioned, this command sits in Luke chapter 9, verse 23. And so, Drake, read that for us.
Luke 9:23 says, "Then he said to them all," of course, he being Jesus, "whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me." There's the scripture we're leaning into today.
Well, maybe the first thing we need to do, Drake, is talk about that word disciple, because people get confused by that word. Yes. And think of Peter and Andrew and all that, the apostles, but disciple simply means follower.
Well, follower, but we've got to understand what that means, because in our day and age, we've been conditioned to go, let's say, in the classroom, and we have somebody that's in the front of the classroom, the teacher, the professor, and they, teach a lesson. And this is our culture today. And then the student leaves and does not live life typically with that teacher or that professor or whoever. we have to understand, no. It's not based on our Western culture here. It's exactly the experience that we see Jesus with his disciples, in the sense of, I'm going to teach this, and then we're going to live life together. And then first and foremost, you're going to see me as the example. Now, John, you and I understand this. We believe in this. Now, the difference is Jesus is the perfect model. And now where we're at with Jesus in our heart, getting those teachings, then you would follow us, let's say, if you come to the church, because we want not only to teach, we want to live life with you, and then follow our example as a broken human being, because we know better than anyone how messed up we are, John. However, in the humility of that, we can grow and become mature in that, and we want other people to follow us as under shepherds of Christ. As Paul says, follow me as I follow Christ. And that is the let's say, the picture of being a disciple. First and foremost, teaching it. Well, you see it first. That's what draws people in. Then they ask and seek and knock, and then we teach Jesus. We see that Jesus teaching up on the mountain, then you go do it together. Not, hey, I'm the one up, one down mentality teacher here, and hey, I know everything, you go and try to figure out by yourself. No, the teacher is with them in the center of their life. Because what happens if you think about this in the sense of our question, are you the center of your existence? Oftentimes, as teachers or professors, we're pushing them away from living with us in the reality that we claim, and we push them off, and they're young. They don't know. So what happens is they fall back into the center of their existence, and they begin interpreting and really understanding that through their own impulses and habits and everything that we fall into when it comes to if we're just by ourselves. We kind of have can I put it this way? When we're all by ourselves, we kind of have the mark of Cain. We separate ourselves from God. And Cain says in the Old Testament, oh, wait a second, that's too much for me to bear. That's too much for any human being to bear, is to have the mark of Cain, and you're isolated all by yourself in trying to figure out life and or these teachings. It doesn't work. And so understanding what disciple is in the sense of the bigger picture, in the sense of civilization, what that means throughout all time, is very crucial, or we'll miss the mark, as Paul shared in his writings.
Well, let's get back to this command specifically, deny yourself, and talk about what this command is really all about.
Well, let me just give a quick definition out of the Dictionary of Bible Themes. You can go out there and see this so that we can have a very well-described definition. So here it is out of the Dictionary of the Bible Themes. This command is about self-denial, which is defined as, here you go, the willingness to deny oneself possessions or status in order to grow in holiness and commitment to God, to get into the presence of God. Now, let me pause here, because this can be misinterpreted. It does not say throw away, that you don't get to use possessions and or status. It's simply implying, this definition, that we actually set aside those things, deny ourselves by not making that priority in our life, and then what we're going to do is use our possessions and or status to the glory of God. And of course, God owns all things, is all status. And once we get into the Lord's presence, we deny ourselves, and we can do that in the will of God. Then we're going to have the power of God to truly live life in the way, again, as it was meant to be lived out, with God and each other, developing, we can say increasing and growing in God's goodness. And we'll even say his very goodness.
Right. Well, it makes me think of the Apostle Paul. Of course, he was Saul originally and took great pride in his upbringing, in his teachings, in his status and such, until he met Jesus, and then became Paul.
Yes.
And it's very interesting that he made that, it took time, but made that switch from self to denying self and keeping his eyes focused on Jesus.
I love the Apostle Paul because, like you and I, broken. Mm-hmm. But you can see in his writings in the book of Philippians, where he connects his reality and his teachings with this teaching with Jesus that we see in Luke 9 in the Gospels. And this is critical because this is what every Christian ought to do. I'm teaching this, but it is going to be in line with the wonderfully weird commands of Christ. And we see Paul in this experience, or what this is, in Philippians 3, 7, and 8. And John, why don't I ask you to read that so we can kind of get an understanding that even as a broken human being, as Paul was, we can do this. Because one of the things I'm hearing, well, I'm not Jesus, so I can't do it. Well, okay, fine. Let's relate now to Paul, and then we'll get back to the perfect model, Jesus. So go ahead and read that, John.
All right, Philippians chapter 3, verses 7 and 8, and here he talks about it, says, "But whatever were gains to me, I now consider loss for the sake of Christ. What is more, I consider everything a loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord, for whose sake I have lost all things. I consider them garbage that I may gain Christ."
Can I say, wow? Wow. You know, here is Paul, again, like you and I, like those who are listening, that he's talking about gain and loss, and we've got to lose all of who we are and what we do and what we have so that we can truly gain Christ, so that then we can be living in the will of God. We can even say the kingdom of God, or in his presence. And that's what the New Testament is all about. Mm-hmm. We don't live in the Old Testament times, but isn't it amazing, John, how many Christians continue to fall in that old tradition? It doesn't take long for us to truly examine someone to say, wow, why aren't you living in the presence of the Lord with us in this day that God has given us, in this movement, this new movement, in the presence of God, so that we can move forward in that, rather than living as we see the Old Testament people. You know, that's the, is that, I will say, benefit, the blessings of where we live today. We live in the greatest period of time because we get to live fully in the presence of the Lord if we choose. Mm-hmm. We're all ministers of Christ, as we see Moses and Abraham and all the prophets. They were not that fortunate. They were a link to that, but they could not live in it until the Christ, the Messiah, came, so that then the door is open, the veil has been torn apart, that then you can freely go there morally, ethically, and all of that, and live with God, live with Christ and others, so that we can truly live in the power of the presence of the Lord, which we see in the Old Testament, but that's only one person going up there, Moses, to the mountain at the beginning in Genesis. Mm-hmm. No, we all have that ability now through Christ to live on the mountain and watch and pray and truly be disciples of Jesus, where we're moving God's presence forward now and for all eternity.
And to meet with God personally, one-on-one.
That's right. You don't have to go into the tent anymore to experience God with these anointed priests and holy people. No, you are that person, Christian. That's exactly what Jesus brought. And the temple in the Old Testament was nothing more than the picture of God's will, we can say his kingdom, or the Garden of Eden. And of course, we don't have to go to the temple. We are the temple.
Right.
And we get to truly live that out. But there's one big command that we've got to listen to and or obey if we expect that to happen in our reality. Deny self. You cannot be the center of existence, or the center of even your world, or living towards, let's say, people who believe they're the center of the world, and all of your time and resources, are going towards that, and we're enabling, without realizing it, that person by being people pleasers. We're not to be people pleasers. We are to be Christ pleasers, and that has to be our number one priority in life, or we will miss the mark, and we'll be living at the bottom of the mountain, if you will.
Well, and Jesus didn't just say deny yourself. He was the example of
Yes,
it.
yes. Here's our teacher, right? Exactly what we were talking about earlier. He's going to teach it, but then he goes, and as we see in John chapter 13, what does he do, John? He's the example. This is what a servant looks like. And of course, we see that episode in the New Testament of Jesus, or that experience with his disciples, and then he leans into it, and what does he do?
Washes the disciples' feet.
He washes the disciples' feet. Now, I wish we can get into the imagery of that in our mind, and or the analogy of what that means, and the meaning behind that. But just imagine how filthy, nasty, and just stinky their feet must have been. They didn't get to get into a car, wipe their feet off on their mats in the car. That was their mode of transportation, with sandals, of course, open toes. Could you imagine what their feet would look like at the end of, let's say, that journey or that day? So we're not talking about something that's just, let me pat go get a pedicure or whatever.
Right.
We're talking about filth, lowering yourself as Jesus did, in the sense of humility, to show what true humility looks like in the sense of servanthood. And so he taught it. It wasn't about him. It was about we together. And so we see that picture there in John 13. And I would encourage people to go read John 13, verses 1 through 17 to really get that. But get into the details a little bit in the sense of your imagination, so that you can imagine what that looks like, because it's not like us today. Remember, very few things reflect Jesus in the sense of our culture today.
Right.
And so,
Right.
yeah, there you go. You have Paul there, broken, but now we've got the perfect example showing us how to do it through that example of washing the disciples' feet. And if you recall that, Peter's like, no. Jesus says, no, you've got to deny yourself. Get over here. And I'm going to serve you. And serve what? Serve us in the sense of our faith, and, better word is life.
So basically saying no to self and yes to God.
Yeah, so I guess in other words, what we can say is, to deny yourself means to say exactly what you said, John, to say no to yourself and yes to God. Or can I put it this way? Simply let your yeses be yes and your no be no. Anything more comes from the evil one. Going back to the command, judge not, where we said, you know what? Let your yeses be yeses, your no's be no's, towards this reality that you chose to commit to and be engaged in. Mm-hmm. And we're all over the place with this, but that's exactly what we need to do. We need to say yes, deny ourselves moment by moment, so that then we can live in the reality of that, let's say that reality of the abundance of Christ, and or what God has for us in our life, to be fruitful and to be fulfilled.
So the problem then, I guess, as you're talking about, is that we just, as Christians even, we just refuse to not be self-centered.
Yeah, we refuse to get out of the centeredness, and then without realizing it, all hell breaks loose, because we're so selfish. And that's what it comes down to, is selfishness. We refuse to take up now our cross daily, because is it easy to deny those let's say sins, or those impulses, or to deny our human nature in the sense of the fall? Oh, it is difficult, and that is our cross. That is the problem. Cross always represents problem. Mm-hmm. And so we must take up our problems daily and resolve this, but through the faith, and not just being isolated, but with a community of people, in the sense of how God designed life to be. And that is to take up your cross daily with others. If you're doing it by yourself, as I shared with others, you're truly not. What am I trying to say here? You're not taking up your cross daily in the way God planned it to be in the fall. So, I know, how can we kind of identify if somebody is in this problem, or other words, what's the symptoms of this problem? Well, it's not hard, John, to see the symptoms or signs of a Christian who is not listening to this command. And listening means to hear it and obey it.
Okay.
And so all we have to do, John, if we wanted to do this, and to assess, not to judge, all you have to do is look at, let's say, Christian schedules and or checkbook to see if this command, deny self, is a reality in their life. So now if we had that ability and we did that, let's just take our own existence, right? If we looked at and assess our own life, what do we want? We want the presence of the Lord, not the sin of all of this, the curse of God, right? So if after doing an assessment on a person's time and money, and they are obedient to Jesus's teachings, what you will see is they are on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, kind of as we see Moses, right, in the Old Testament. But we're on the mountain with the Lord, in the will of God, if you will, as Jesus taught his disciples to strive for in the Lord's Prayer. Remember the Lord's Prayer. Mm-hmm. That's what it looks like in obedience, in the sense of being in God's will. We are to test God's good, pleasing, and perfect will, to be in the presence of his reality, or in the presence with him in reality is how I should say that. Now, what does this look like for the Christian who is not in the will of God? Well, a Christian's existence then, through looking at their time, and can I say their gold or money, will reflect the Old Testament church community at the bottom of the mountain, as we see Moses coming off the mountain. And what is the community of God doing? They're worshiping their idols. We can say their habits. And so Moses comes down, and he's so heartbroken. Moses is. He drops the tablets, the standards of God, and he's just heartbroken. Why? Because what comes out of their time and money is what looks like a golden calf, but what is where they're investing their money and time in, and that is towards their own idols, I should say, their own idols or own selfish impulses to make self feel alive rather than be alive in the presence of the Lord. And we see this today. It's radical. We only have a few moments here, and I'll give you some things to do. But think about this, Christian. I mean, your time and money, if you can be a helicopter in the sense of looking over this, and you're watching and praying over this, what would arise out of your time and or schedule? Is it the presence of the Lord that would come up, or is it habits in your life that you feed yourself first? Are you the center of your existence, and you feed that, and you feed your bad shopping habits, or your bad any habit, be it drinking, smoking, gambling, whatever? If that is higher priority, and that is what rises out of the mist of who you are in your vulnerabilities or in your nakedness and in your impulses and yada, 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 if that arises, you are more the picture of the community of God, or people at the bottom of the mountain with Aaron, a preacher, rather than truly, as Moses begged people, come with me to the top of the mountain, which is through Jesus in the New Testament, and we get to live there together. It's radical, and we refuse to deny ourselves and or even watch and pray and lean into these commands of Jesus to get Jesus into our heart. And we have, in sad reality today, what we see today. And most Christians are living in the apocalypse of all of that. And denying self is not even a slight reflection, which should be a reflection of God, Jesus, in the sense of us reflecting the image of God to a very dark world. I know this is powerful, but boy, do we need to understand we're disciples of Jesus and nobody else. So, John, with that, let's kind of go back and forth a little bit here. What are some things people can do? We have about 3 minutes, so let's give you something you can do.
Some actionable steps.
Some actionable steps. So, number one, hey, deny yourself by not feeding your impulses up front. Listen, folks, you have feelings, you have emotions, you have moods, but the problem is you're interpreting life and creating your own little principles or reality, and you're feeding them up front rather than living by principles or by managing your life through the principles or wisdom of God presented in the Bible. That should be priority. Live by principle. You say you're a person of principle? Well, then prove it. Do it. Deny yourself and actually do it, and get rid of those habits that are bad. Number 2, choose to deny yourself by becoming a true disciple of Christ, as we've been talking, by dwelling with like-minded people in Jesus with his truth and grace. Again, with other servants, it can be make sure you do everything you can in your marriage. I know that's not reality, but do the best you can in family and in church. And let me say this, when I say church, get into a church that is leaning into it, like Elevating Life Church in Fort Morgan, so that we can truly do this together and move forward together, so that we can truly be in the presence of the Lord as one. And then one last thing, and I'm done. Stop being people pleasers. Stop being people pleasers and bowing down to the desires of broken humans. Right now, decide to live only to the desires of Christ, to know and understand what it truly means to be fulfilled and fruitful in life now and for all eternity. There you have it, John. 3 things. Deny yourself, not feeding your impulse. Number 2, choose to deny yourself by becoming a true disciple. And number 3, stop being a people pleaser and bow down to the desires of Christ.
This week's Wonderfully Weird command, deny yourself. And that comes from Luke chapter 9, verse 23. Well, as always, very challenging to us here, Drake, and I appreciate that very much.
You're very welcome. And as we're leading out of this, let's go back to that opening question that you need to think about. Are you the center of your existence? If you are Christian, you know the solution, the result now. Jesus. Deny yourself.
That's it for this week on Wonderfully Weird Living with Pastor Drake. Join us again next week. If you would like to learn more or have any questions or comments, please feel free to email Pastor Drake at wonderfullyweirdliving@gmail.com. To obtain your own copy of the book Wonderfully Weird, please log on to www.wonderfullyweirdliving.com and click on the button that says Buy the Book. Wonderfully Weird Living is a ministry of 4-dimensional living, offering wholeness coaching for mind, body, soul, and spirit. Also, would you please prayerfully consider becoming a financial partner to help the Wonderfully Weird Living ministry impact more and more lives? Please log on to www.4dimensionalliving.com. That's 4dimensionalliving.com with the number 4. Now, for Pastor Drake Hunter, I'm John Waters, wishing you a wonderfully weird week.